Yeah, it's not, but you mentioned sadness, and then as you open to it, there was an opening. I would invite you, don't pull off of that. That is the yearning right there. And I get what you're saying. I mean, this is why it's tricky, because we will all get to this point where we recognize that there's nothing we can do anymore. And so this is actually where a lot of the teachings of the non-doing teachings come. Just stop. And that's, if we can hear that and stay stopped and alert, but most of us get a little lazy when we hear stop. And so this is why I invite these practices like abiding, like inquiry, like keep it going. But my invitation is to transition that underneath that efforting, which the efforting at this point is not about a strict doing, like you say, like you do this and this equals this. It's more like it's just maybe fanning the flames a bit. But listening underneath the doing and the action to what I like to call natural inquiry, which means you give it a spark, but then you let it go in the direction it wants to. And that's a trick. I mean, on some level, that is what non-doing doing is. That's what effortless effort is. It means you need to be engaged, and you're even willing to kind of spark it up by a conscious practice, to start it at least, but you're not attached to the outcome. So you're kind of pointing, and then you're pointing, of course, with curiosity, with an open heart, with a yearning. And your yearning, your prayer is that the absolute or the divine, however you want to term it, hears that prayer and then pulls you in. And that's the trick. I mean, this is where there are certain practices that, because a lot of people have this problem, is they see what needs to be burnt, they've seen their patterning, their conditioning, but they can't get to it. And I think there's many modalities we can use to sort of spark it up. Things like dyads, things like ecstatic dance, things like breath work. It's driving it. And of course we can get caught in the driving. That's the personal will. It's wanting to force, do. I want to get truth now. I want to wake up now. I want to surrender now. But it's tricky, because surrender is what you're looking for. And you can't do surrender. All you can do is be open and available. A lot of people, when they hear surrender or kind of giving everything away to God, people aren't doing it the right way. It's too passive. It's like, oh, here, God, take it. And it's like, God isn't, the ultimate reality isn't in conflict with conditioning and illusion. And it's not listening to the mind. It's listening to the true intention underneath it. Most people's giving it to God is, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to face it. Take it away from me. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes we're graced with that. Something just, boom, opens and falls away, and it's done. 99.99% of the rest of us, it's a constant process that requires our engagement again and again and again and again. And so things like sadness, that's the pure one right there. There's all these emotions. I mean, we don't have a problem with love. We don't have a problem with bliss. We don't have a problem with joy. We're completely open to that. We have problems with fear and anger and rage and shame and guilt and sadness. And opening to them.
I was surprised at the quality of what I put into the word of sadness. It surprised me. I realized that one of the qualities in it is helplessness.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what trips up a lot of people too, is when they tap into the helplessness, they go even more passive. Like it's like a tuning out. Like, what's the point? I can't do it. And there's a truth, because of course, true surrender, true letting go is completely helpless. You see, you're completely helpless. And yet, why do you have to stop? Why do you have to go into a contraction of there's nothing I can do? What if you just kept going? And what is going? I don't know what going is for you. But keep going.
Yeah, I realized that the helplessness is like a portal. There's something beyond.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, the helplessness is really tied in with victimhood. And I mean, this is where, I mean, when the transmutation of the psychological therapeutic relationship happens in a big way. Because right now it's kind of overall, not everywhere, but overall it's when victim shows up, all that there is this open yin mother. Therapists, counselors, they're actually trained, and they would be unethical if they had the sword in their hand. Helplessness, okay, you listen. When is enough enough? Because everyone, whether they're really wounded or they're sitting in a more awake space, everybody's looking for what you just brought up. What is going to push me through? And usually that container, or when we come to our own suffering and it hurts, and of course you have to respond. It's like you see your child and they're crying. You have to respond. But when we're dealing with these parts as an adult, as an awake being, as an adult, and I love how Adyashanti defines enlightenment as growing up. Meaning, this is here, okay. When are you going to grow up? And growing up means, when are you going to move into a space where, okay, this happened, and I'm not going to blame anymore. That was a necessary step. At a certain point, especially if we've been traumatized and wounded, we have to own that, because that was never given to us. It was just jammed down our throat. Traumatized, victim. Whether it was as a child or life in general, this is just the abuse of power that happens. But as we open to this, especially inside of ourselves, this comes up. And we respond, and this comes up and we respond. But then down the road, whether it's months or years, it's happened thousands of times, and there's that part in you, how do I make my way through? Because every time I hit this, the guise is different, but I never move, I'm stuck. It's been 10 years, 20 years, and every time this comes up, it's the same damn thing. So what that person, just like you're saying, what's the punch, what's the spark that's going to push you through? What's going to pull you into surrender? Well, part of it, this is where the whole opening to emotions invitation comes from. You can't force your way through, but when these contracted emotions come, you can open to them. And when you open to them, what happens as a byproduct is that the emotional energies start thawing and unwinding. So the blockage gets thinner every time we open. It doesn't matter if we open more in a negative way or a positive way. Now, like, you know, in India, in the East, they have the dark path and the light path. The path of bliss or the path of transformation. They both take you to the same place. But one's more gritty, the dark path, which is all about just in it and just getting ground to shreds by the intensity of the emotional experience, the psychic experience. Or whether you take the path of meditation and bliss and you're kind of melting it more slowly. But there's these, you know, fear, anger, shame, guilt. But, oh, the sadness. There's hate there too. Kind of, it's the mega structure, self-hatred. But underneath is just the sadness. And if you can tune directly into the sadness, you melt all that crap. Because it's not just a grieving process that's happening, which is part of it. It's the pure expression of love. It's just sad. When you're suffering, when someone else is suffering, when you're stuck, it's sad. Because the reality is, you're free. We're all free. But we're suffering. And when you see that within yourself and others, it draws out a compassion. It draws out a love. Out of the void, out of truth, we could say. That's the power. That's the power of love. It's the power of compassion. It touches the pain. It holds space for the pain. But when the power of that love is strong enough, it just runs towards it and gives it a punch in the face. And when enough of the energy is dissipated and unwound, that punch in the face isn't just pain. It breaks you open. And so that's why when you said that word sadness, I could feel it in you. You were so connected. It wasn't just an abstract concept. Your body-mind started weeping. And that's the way in. Most people run from that. Oh my goodness. I often share that, the way in is heartbreak. Meaning, most people can't even conceive the potential that some negative emotion would come up and they would just dive in and feel it and cry and feel it and cry and feel it and cry. The vast majority of people is like, when something comes up and your tears come out, everyone rushes to you to try to save you from it. And what I'm saying is, no. Like, that's my experience. I for a long time, and this actually happened to me just a couple months ago. This came up, and tears came, and it was whatever it was, and someone rushed, and I'm like, I just repelled. I'm like, don't save me. I don't need you to save me. I can handle whatever comes up. I'm not running away from it. I don't run away from tears. But that comes from years of being forced and dealing with the resistance. And what kept me there, I didn't know what kept me there. I guess I could say in retrospect it was a love for truth. It wasn't a concept. But why did I keep going back to it? Even before my whole openings in spirituality came, and I was psychotherapy and psychology was my big thing. Even when I was in that process and I was dealing with pain, there was always this question, but is it true? So someone did this to me and that was wrong, and I can blame them and I can be angry at them. But what's true here? And my therapists weren't kind of holding that bar for me, but I was like, what is true? What is true? Here's depression, and I have to kind of save myself because there was years where I was just kind of surviving. And yet, what was true? And then when the spiritual opening started happening, for whatever reason, I just rested as that space and allowed that to clear through. Partly because I didn't know what else to do. Like, what was I supposed to do? Just overwhelmed. And so it's like, well, some people say that, like, oh, you made a choice. I'm like, there's no choice. I was broken open, It was part of a survival technique. Well, you just got to let it pass through, because what else are you going to do? But that portal of sadness is, oh my goodness, if you can befriend that is the prayer of the divine. That's the purest prayer. Truth is just rushing from every corner of the universe towards you. The problem is you don't feel it at that moment. And the ego and the mind is trying its best to take you away from that, to pull you off, to save you. This is why we have to honor these patterns within ourselves. The mind, the ego is trying to save us from pain. But the growing up is that we don't want that anymore. We want what's true, but we've seen through our life experience that that's not working anymore. So we want something different, and we don't know what it is.